Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping backward. "Chloe, move." I looked up, confused. "What?" "That's Olivia's seat. Move to the other side of the table." I glanced at the other side, where there was a chair wedged awkwardly in the corner, the one we usually left empty because it didn't quite fit properly. "Mark, I always sit here. There's a perfectly good seat." "I said move." His voice had risen, attracting everyone's attention. "Olivia should sit with family, not shoved in a corner." The words hit me like a slap. Not family. After 8 years, I wasn't family? My mom touched my arm, her voice pleading. "Honey, just switch seats. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was 8 years of big deals I'd swallowed. 8 years of being treated as lesser. 8 years of my mother choosing peace over defending me. I stood up slowly, and that's when Mark grabbed my shoulder, his grip painful and possessive. "This seat is for my real daughter, Olivia. Get out." The room went completely silent. Jake dropped his fork. Connor's eyes went wide. My mother gasped, but didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend me. And Olivia smiled, a small, satisfied smile that told me she'd been waiting for this moment, for this final confirmation that she would always matter more than me. I pulled away from Mark's grip, feeling something inside me finally snap. Not with anger, but with clarity. "You're right," I said quietly. "This is your family, not mine." Never was, apparently. I walked to my room, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, small and pleading. "Mark, that was too harsh. She's been cooking all day. Maybe you should—" "She needs to learn her place," Mark interrupted. "This is my house, my rules. Olivia is my daughter. Chloe needs to accept that." I grabbed my coat, my purse, my phone charger. I could hear my mom crying now, but she wasn't coming to check on me. She was crying at the table, letting Mark comfort her, letting him rewrite what just happened into something where I was being oversensitive and he was the reasonable one. I walked past the dining room without looking at anyone and headed for the door. "Chloe, wait!" Jake had followed me. "Where are you going?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I can't stay here anymore." "It's Christmas," he said, and his voice cracked a little. At 18, he was old enough to understand what had just happened, old enough to see how wrong it was. "Please don't go." "Jake, your dad just told me I'm not real family. After 8 years of living here, of treating you and Connor like brothers, of trying so hard to fit in, he made it crystal clear where I stand. I can't pretend anymore that this is okay." I hugged him quickly, grabbed my keys, and left. I drove with tears streaming down my face, no destination in mind as the sun set on Christmas Day. I ended up at my friend Marcus's apartment. Marcus and I had been friends since freshman year of college, and his family lived 3 states away, so he was spending Christmas alone, binging movies and Chinese takeout. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He just pulled me inside, handed me his hoodie, and let me cry for an hour straight. Then I told him everything, not just what happened at dinner, but all of it. 8 years of being treated as less than, of my mother's silence, of trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. "Chloe," Marcus said carefully when I finally stopped talking, "I'm going to say something and I need you to really hear me. You've been living in an emotionally abusive situation." "That's dramatic," I started, but he held up his hand. "Is it? A grown man physically removed you from the dinner table on Christmas and told you that you're not real family. Your mother watched and said nothing. This isn't a one-time thing. You just told me 8 years of examples. This is a pattern, and you've been so deep in it that you think trying to survive it makes you weak, but it doesn't. Getting out makes you strong." His words broke something open in me. I'd been so focused on what I must be doing wrong, how I could change to make Mark accept me, that I'd never stopped to ask whether Mark's acceptance was even worth having. That night, lying on Marcus's couch, I made a list on my phone of every apartment listing I could afford. Within a week, I'd contacted 3 landlords. Within a week, I'd signed a lease on a tiny studio apartment across town. My mother called dozens of times during that week. I finally answered on day 5. "Chloe, please come home. Mark feels terrible about what happened. He overreacted. We can work this out as a family." "Mom, did he apologize?" Silence. Then, "He's not good with apologies, but he does care about you in his own way." That's not what I asked. Did he apologize? Did he acknowledge that what he did was wrong? "Chloe, you're being stubborn. Families fight. You can't just run away every time things get hard." "I'm not running away from hard things. I'm walking away from being treated as worthless. There's a difference." "If you do this," her voice turned cold, "if you leave, you're choosing to break this family apart. Is that really what you want?" That question revealed everything I needed to know. I was being blamed for breaking apart a family that never actually included me. I want to be in a family where I matter, where I'm not tolerated but loved, where my mother defends me instead of asking me to accept mistreatment. I guess that's not this family. I hung up. Moving out was harder than I expected, not physically but emotionally. Jake and Connor helped me pack, both of them quiet and sad, Connor crying when he hugged me goodbye. My mother stayed in her bedroom the entire time, refusing to come out. Mark wasn't home, which was its own message. In my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, I felt terrified and free at the same time. That night, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Chloe, this is Patricia, Mark's ex-wife, Olivia's mother. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Jake. I heard what happened, and I needed to call you." The sound of my chair scraping across the hardwood floor echoed through the sudden silence of our Christmas dinner. Everyone stopped mid-conversation, forks frozen halfway to mouths, as my stepdad Mark's hand gripped my shoulder so tightly it would leave bruises. "This seat is for my real daughter, Olivia. Get out." His voice was low, venomous, cutting through the holiday music playing softly in the background. I looked up at him, stunned, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Around the table sat my mother, pale and silent, her mouth opening but no words coming out. My 2 younger stepbrothers stared at their plates. Mark's daughter Olivia, the golden child who'd arrived late as always, stood behind him with a smirk on her perfectly made-up face. And there I was, 22 years old, being physically removed from the family dinner table on Christmas Day because I was sitting in her seat. I'd lived in this house for 8 years. I'd set this table every holiday since I was 14. I'd cooked half the meal currently going cold in front of these people. But in that moment, as Mark's fingers dug into my shoulder and my mother looked away, I realized something that broke my heart and set me free at the same time. I had never actually been part of this family. I was just a temporary placeholder until his real daughter decided to show up. So I stood up slowly, carefully pulled my shoulder from his grip, and looked each person at that table in the eye. Then I walked out of that dining room, grabbed my coat and keys, and left. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that terrible, humiliating, painful moment, was the beginning of the best decision I ever made. This is the story of how being pushed out of a family I desperately wanted to belong to led me to discover who I really was and what family actually means. My name is Chloe Bennett, and I've spent most of my life trying to earn love I thought had to be deserved. I was 14 when my mom married Mark Davidson, and I'd been so hopeful back then. My biological father had left when I was 6, and I'd watched my mom struggle as a single parent for years. When Mark came into our lives, he seemed like everything we needed: stable, financially secure, confident. He had 2 sons from his first marriage, Jake and Connor, who were 10 and 8 at the time. And he had Olivia, his 17-year-old daughter, who'd chosen to stay living with her mother after the divorce. My mom, Sarah, was so in love with Mark that she glowed. After years of exhaustion and worry, she finally had someone to share the burden with. I was happy for her. I wanted this to work. I tried so hard to make Mark like me, to fit into this new family structure. I learned to cook Mark's favorite meals. I helped with Jake and Connor's homework. I stayed quiet when Mark made decisions I didn't agree with. I became smaller and smaller, thinking that if I just took up less space, if I just needed less, if I just gave more, I would finally be accepted.
But Olivia was always the standard I could never meet. Even though she rarely visited, even though she openly disrespected Mark and was rude to my mother, she was his princess, his real daughter, the one whose opinion mattered, whose preferences came first, whose presence transformed Mark from the critical, demanding man I knew into someone warm and indulgent. I was in college now, working part-time while studying nursing, still living at home to save money. Jake was 18 and Connor 16, both decent kids who'd grown up treating me like a sister, though they'd learned from Mark to defer to Olivia whenever she appeared. My mother, Sarah, had slowly changed over the 8 years of marriage. The brightness I remembered from my childhood had dimmed. She walked on eggshells around Mark, constantly trying to keep peace, always choosing his comfort over my feelings. I'd watched her become a shadow of herself, and I'd promised myself I wouldn't end up like that. But somehow, without realizing it, I'd become exactly the same. Always accommodating, always shrinking, always hoping that this time, if I just did everything right, I would finally be enough. Christmas had always been complicated in our blended family, but this year felt different from the start. Mark had been especially irritable in the weeks leading up to the holiday, snapping at me over small things, dishes in the sink, my car parked in his spot in the driveway, the way I'd folded the laundry. My mom kept making excuses for him. "He's stressed about work, honey. Just try not to antagonize him." I hadn't been antagonizing anyone. I'd been doing exactly what I always did, existing as quietly as possible while contributing more than my share to the household. I'd done all the Christmas shopping for Jake and Connor's gifts from the family. I'd spent 2 days decorating the house. I'd made cookies, wrapped presents, and planned the entire Christmas dinner menu. On Christmas morning, I'd gotten up at 6 to start the turkey. By noon, the house smelled like holidays. Roasted meat, fresh bread, cinnamon, and pine from the tree I'd decorated alone while everyone else watched football. Mark had spent the morning in his recliner, occasionally shouting instructions about how I should be cooking things, despite never having cooked a holiday meal himself. My mom fluttered around, trying to help, but mostly just getting in the way, her anxiety making her clumsy. Jake and Connor played video games in the basement. At 2 o'clock, we all gathered around the dining room table. I'd set it beautifully, my grandmother's china that my mom had kept from her first marriage, cloth napkins I'd ironed, a centerpiece I'd made from pine cones and candles. The food was laid out, steam rising from covered dishes, and then Olivia texted that she was running late. "We'll wait," Mark announced, even though the food was getting cold. An hour passed, then another. Mark wouldn't let anyone start eating. My mom nervously suggested maybe we should at least let the boys have some appetizers, and Mark had snapped at her so harshly that she'd retreated to the kitchen in tears. I followed her, found her leaning against the counter, quietly crying. "Mom, this is ridiculous. The food is ruined. We've been waiting for 2 hours. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If we start without Olivia, he'll be angry for weeks. It's easier to just wait." "Easier for who?" I asked, but she just headed. Finally, at 4:30, Olivia arrived. She breezed in wearing designer clothes, barely acknowledged anyone except Mark, who jumped up to hug her like she was returning from war instead of showing up 2.5 hours late to a meal she'd confirmed she was attending. "Sorry, Daddy," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "I was at brunch with Mom and lost track of time." She glanced at the table and wrinkled her nose. "Is this the same tablecloth from last year? It's kind of dated." I bit my tongue and helped my mom start reheating dishes while Olivia regaled Mark with stories about her life, her new apartment her mother had paid for, her shopping trips, her drama with friends whose names I'd heard 100 times but wouldn't know I existed. Finally, we all sat down. I took my usual seat, the one I'd sat in for every family meal for 8 years, positioned between Jake and my mother. That's when it happened.
Patricia's voice was kind, warm in a way I hadn't expected. "I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. What Mark did to you at Christmas, he did the same thing to me. For 15 years, I was never enough. I was never the right kind of wife, never the right kind of mother. He pitted Olivia against me, made her his princess so he could control her, and turned our sons into referees of our relationship. Leaving him was the hardest and best thing I ever did." Why are you telling me this? I asked, sitting down hard on my still-packed boxes. Because you need to know that none of this is your fault. Mark doesn't know how to love people. He only knows how to control them. Your mother chose to stay in that dynamic, but you chose differently. You chose yourself, and I'm so proud of you for that, even though I barely know you. We talked for 2 hours. Patricia told me stories that mirrored my own experiences so closely it was eerie. She told me how long it took her to rebuild her life after leaving, how her kids eventually understood and respected her choice, how she'd had to learn that she was worthy of love just by existing, not by performing. Jake called me crying after you moved out, she said. He said you were the only stable, kind person in that house besides his brothers. He's scared for your mom, and honestly, so am I. But you can't save someone who won't save themselves. Over the next few months, I focused on building my own life. I threw myself into my nursing studies. I worked extra shifts to furnish my apartment. I started therapy to unpack 8 years of emotional damage. I learned to cook meals for one without feeling lonely. I made new friends and deepened existing friendships with people like Marcus, who saw my value without me having to prove it. Jake and Connor visited often, and I realized I could still have a relationship with them without subjecting myself to Mark's treatment. Patricia became an unexpected ally, often inviting me to coffee and sharing wisdom from her own healing journey. My mother and I had limited contact. She would call occasionally, always with the same script. Mark was trying, things were better, wouldn't I come back for Sunday dinner, for Thanksgiving, for someone's birthday? I always said no. Then, about 6 months after I moved out, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked smaller somehow, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Can I come in?" she asked. I let her in, made tea, and waited. "I'm leaving him," she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm filing for divorce. I should have done it the day he pushed you out of that chair. I should have defended you. I should have been your mother instead of his wife. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry." She broke down crying, and for the first time in years, I saw my real mother. Not the anxious, diminished version Mark had created, but the strong woman I remembered from my childhood. We talked for hours. She explained how she'd lost herself in the marriage, how she'd convinced herself that keeping peace was the same as keeping family, how watching me leave had been a wake-up call she couldn't ignore. "You showed me what courage looks like," she said. "You chose yourself when I couldn't, and I'm finally ready to do the same." Our relationship didn't heal overnight. We started therapy together, working through years of hurt and disappointment. But slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something real. Not the surface-level relationship we'd had when she was with Mark, but something honest and genuine. It's been 2 years since that Christmas dinner. I'm sitting in my apartment, a bigger one now, one I can actually afford on my nursing salary, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise. My mom lives 10 minutes away in her own apartment, genuinely happy for the first time in years. Jake is in college, Connor thriving in high school, both of them visiting regularly and calling me their sister without any qualifiers. I haven't spoken to Mark or Olivia since I left, and I don't miss them at all. That probably sounds harsh, but it's honest. Some people teach us who we want to be. Others teach us who we don't want to become. Mark taught me that I don't need to shrink myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. That moment at the Christmas table, as humiliating and painful as it was, gave me a gift I didn't recognize at the time. Permission to leave. Permission to choose myself. Permission to understand that real family doesn't push you out of chairs and tell you you're not enough. Real family makes room for you, adjusts when you need space, defends you when you're attacked, loves you not because you've earned it, but because you exist.
I learned that I am enough exactly as I am, that my worthiness isn't determined by whether someone else can recognize it, that walking away from people who hurt you isn't giving up, it's growing up. This Christmas, I'll be hosting dinner at my apartment. My mom will be here, Jake and Connor, Marcus and a few close friends. Patricia might even stop by. We'll eat food that probably isn't perfectly cooked, at a table that definitely isn't perfectly set, and no one will have to wait hours for someone to show up. No one will be pushed from their seat. No one will be told they're real family. Because we'll all be there by choice, loving each other by choice, showing up for each other because we want to, not because we have to. And that, I've learned, is what real family actually means. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is push you away, because in being pushed out, you finally get the space to discover where you actually belong. And trust me, it's somewhere so much better than a seat at a table you were never truly welcome.